All right, hello everyone. Welcome back to Historical Geology 1404. Today is going to be lecture 10. We are leaving the Hadean, Archean, and Proterozoic, and we are diving into Phanerozoic, Paleozoic, all of that. Okay, we're exploring how life changed from where we left off, and all of the associated tectonic changes, supercontinents, orogenies, cratonic sequences, etc. As usual, let's open up the floor to any questions or comments or interesting stories you may have heard of. Anything going on? Aaliyah, do your nails have little bows on them? That's crazy. I should get a set? I can't even imagine how much more difficult my life would be with those. Yeah.
Actually, I think I found some hummus in my backyard.
Yeah? It's very possible. This region used to be volcanic. Not long ago, geologically speaking. Within the last 20 million years, this was a pretty volcanically active area. Yeah?
Weren't we underwater at one point, though?
Yes. Yes. This region was underwater for a long time. As a matter of fact, we are going to talk about next week. Are we going to get there next week? Because we're only meeting one day next week.
Well, that's Thanksgiving break next week.
This for the high school. College doesn't get off until Wednesday. You are not required to. The college has dictated, they sent out an email on Tuesday saying your high school students cannot be required to be here for class. They may choose to be here, but ECISD is not running transportation. So if you want to be here for class, you'll need to find your own method of transportation to get here. I will still be having class because the college Thanksgiving break doesn't start until Wednesday.
So Wednesday?
Wednesday. So I'm still having class on Monday and Tuesday.
Well, I'm gonna be out of town. So.
Okay? I will be having a lecture. If you're not here, you'll miss it in person. But, I mean, I record every single one of these, so it'll be posted, right? It'll just be on my YouTube channel like they all are, right? All of the lectures we've had have always been accessible to you if you miss a class. They're just on my YouTube channel. Huh? What? What am I doing? I'm smoking a turkey. I'm going to try smoking a turkey for the first time. Yeah.
I'm going to Cali, sir. So.
You're going to California?
Yeah.
Nice. Don't light on fire.
He's going to the pool.
Yeah. Any interesting Thanksgiving plans for anyone? Louisiana? Why Louisiana? You have family over there?
Yeah.
Where at?
I don't know what it's called, sir. I didn't know it was Louisiana. I've never been. Yo, we're gonna go shoot some crocodiles.
What the hell? My phone's not loading.
Well, you can't shoot a crocodile. There are no crocodiles.
Or an alligator.
There we go. As far as shooting them, I just hope you have a license, or whoever takes you has a license.
Are you gonna eat it?
Yeah, alligator tastes really good.
Yeah, it tastes like chicken. Is that true?
It's a little stringier than chicken, but kinda, yeah.
We're gonna drive up to Dallas for our Thanksgiving,
Mm-hmm.
and then after that, we're gonna fly to Las Vegas, and we're gonna go do that at the Spirit, like doing like a Wizard of the Oz showing.
Ooh, you're gonna go see wait, Wicked 2? The second part?
My sister's gonna go watch that. I think over there as well, but the Spirit's also doing like a 3D interactive.
That's cool. That's really cool. I'm gonna go see the new Wicked Part 2 movie tomorrow night. I'm really excited. Yeah. Can you get extra credit for your birthday? No. Give me a reason.
It's your birthday gift to me.
It's the day the world becomes better.
Oh yeah? When is your birthday? November 25th. No, I'm not going to do that. If it had been the 26th, maybe.
What about me?
Mine's on the 31st.
No, I'm not going to do that. No birthday extra credit. I do not offer credit to anyone in this class or any of my classes that is not offered to everybody else. Right, but that's not particularly fair to the people whose birthdays are during the summer. Oh, yeah. It's their own fault. That's an L forehead moment, right? Get born in a different year or in a different time. No, we're not doing that. Huh? Wait, whose birthday is it? Happy birthday. No extra credit, but I will say happy birthday. My birthday was last week. So we have a lot of November birthdays in the room right now. Yeah, look at that. Oh yeah, yesterday?
Yeah, mine was yesterday.
Nice. So many November babies in here. I love it. We got a room full of Scorpios and whatever comes after Scorpio. I don't know. You're what? You're not a baby? You think that makes you a grown man? Only legally, my friend. Only legally. I didn't say he was small. There's a lot more that goes into being a man than your age and your size, all right? That's what I'm saying. Okay. Any other comments or questions or anything before we jump in today? Yeah.
Looks like your snake's getting more comfortable.
She's getting a little more comfortable, yeah. I'm trying to get her used to the sounds and smells and sights of the classroom. The more comfortable she is, the more likely it is I'll be able to hold her and other people should be able to hold her as well.
Yeah.
What do you think, honey?
Trying to hold it. Or her.
Oh, she turned around.
No, she's turning around. She's getting defensive. See, when she curls her neck up like that, when she makes her neck into kind of a spring, that means she's getting ready to strike. So if I were to put my hand next to her body, she would strike at me. See? Is she weak? I mean, she's small, but her teeth are very tiny, but they'll still puncture my skin. It would feel like a paper cut. She's bitten me several times. It's never bad. Maybe like one little drop of blood. You just wash it out with soap and water and I'm fine. It doesn't even hurt that long, maybe half an hour or so. Yeah, no. No, I'm not getting a vet.
Everybody in the class hold it.
Yeah, I'm not doing that. All right. Nothing else? What are you striking at, baby girl? I'm right here. I'm too far away. Yeah, she got mad at me. She was like, oh, you wanted to show them that I can strike, huh? Well, I'm not going to stop. Okay. Right. Shall we jump in?
Yeah.
Gavin, would you grab the door for me, please? Thank you. By the way, I'm loving this weather we're having right now. So nice. It's supposed to rain for the next couple of days, I think. I think it's like light to moderate rain. I don't think it's supposed to be a heavy thunderstorm.
Sandals?
Saturday, and I love whenever it rains during the
Dude, it's that
Yeah.
weather.
I love. Why do you keep striking at me? I love when I can like it's chilly and rainy and I can turn on my little gas fireplace I have at my house and just hang out in front of it with a book. Ugh, I hope I have time for that this weekend. All right.
Wow.
Let's start off by talking about the Cambrian. Okay, so we left off by talking about the Precambrian, aka the end of the Proterozoic. Okay, so the Precambrian is all of the time that happened before the Cambrian. So we talked about the Ediacaran fauna. Oh wow, look at her. She is so mad right now.
Ooh, hey.
Yeah, look. You see how she's coiled up vertically? That's like that's what rattlesnakes do. By the way, if you ever see, no, very, very distant relative to rattlesnakes. Very, very distant. Rattlesnakes are here in the United States. They are from Africa. Yeah, do you see that? So when they coil themselves up like that, they can strike further. Right. What? No, she's just feeling a little threatened right now because she was chilling, and then I stroked her back, and then she turned around and I made her strike at me, and now she's mad at me for making her strike at me. So I can show you guys. All right. Okay. So we talked about the Ediacaran fauna. which was this giant explosion of soft-bodied organisms, keyword there being soft-bodied organisms, okay, that we see in Australian rock, okay? It's a Lagerstätten, which is what we call it when you find those soft-bodied shells, soft-bodied fossils, right? So starting in the Cambrian, which is 541 million years ago and went to 485 million years ago, this is where we start seeing the most typical fossils, what we would call typical fossils. Not bacterial colonies, not Ediacaran soft-bodied organisms, more of your shells, your endoskeletons, your exoskeletons, the hard parts that are most commonly preserved. Those start showing up in great abundance during this time, which is why we draw that dividing line there, the Cambrian. We call this the Cambrian explosion. Not a physical kaboom, but an explosion in the diversity of life that we see on the planet during this time, okay? So, we see the first skeletons show up here. The first shells. Now, what could prompt this? It wouldn't just occur, it wouldn't just become a positive mutation on its own. Some random mutation caused an organism or multiple organisms somewhere around the same time to develop hard parts. Why? Why go from Ediacaran soft-bodied organisms to hard parts? What advantage could that have had, which made it an evolutionary positive? Protecting what? Yes, protection. Protection from what specifically?
Other animals?
Predators. Something wants to eat you. What's the solution? Get too hard to be eaten. Don't get et, right? Either you have a skeleton that provides your body a little bit more substance, a little more form, a little more flexibility, a little more motion, or a shell, which provides your body protection from some exterior threat. We see both of these things show up here during the Cambrian. Okay, now, there is a difference between two different forms of calcite that I have told you about. There's your typical normal calcite, which you learned looks like this, right? That's the calcite you played with in 1403. And then there is aragonite. Aragonite is slightly chemically different, but is still in that calcite group, okay? Depending on the chemistry of the ocean, shells will be made out of calcite or aragonite. Aragonite is not as stable as calcite is. And so slighter temperature or chemical variations in the ocean water could result in aragonite shells becoming unstable and falling apart, breaking down, becoming brittle, etc. So we can track these changes in ocean chemistry over time by seeing whether the shells that were grown during different times were made out of more calcite or more aragonite. And this gives us some insight into the ocean chemistry at those points in time. So during the Cambrian, we see lots of sponges, mollusks, which includes everything from brachiopods and bivalves, which are like, you know, clams and such. Trilobites, okay, so our arthropods, our multi-shell parted arthropods here. We'll talk about those in a minute. And echinoderms. Echinoderms include everything from crinoids to sea stars to sand dollars. Okay, all of these show up in big numbers during the Cambrian. Trilobites are probably the most iconic marine invertebrate from this early life history. Okay, she's kind of just following me with my head as I walk back and forth here. Very, very cautious. So we use these as index fossils. They are very useful as index fossils. Why? Well, because trilobites have very distinctive shell pieces, right, that separate them from many other forms of life. There were many different species of trilobites, which existed for relatively short periods of time each, which is great for us to use for correlation. And they were all over the planet. Okay, they spread into so many different marine ecosystems. So all these factors together add up to a very good index fossil, or I should say a whole wide range of very good index fossils. They had a few very positive advantages that protected them from dying off. They had one of the first whole body defensive shells, okay? And they were mobile. Being mobile is a huge advantage. You can go and find your food instead of waiting for it to come to you. That alone is a very good advantage. They also had these hard shells covering their bodies, gave them advantage against predators for a long time. Then they had eyes. Cells specialized for picking up light. Okay, now their eyes probably weren't super complex. But what they did, or I should say, they probably couldn't tell lots of different colors. But what they did have, they were compound eyes. Have you ever seen the eyes of a fly? Those are compound eyes, where it looks like it's got so many different faces on it. Each one of those is a single light-absorbing cell that's absorbing light and interpreting it back, or sending it to the brain, and the brain is interpreting it for what it could mean. This is a trilobite's compound eye. Each one of these, a photoreceptive cell absorbing light. Now, there was a weakness to these eyes. First of all, huge advantage having an eye like this, but it came with a disadvantage. Notice where the eyes are on the body. Where are they?
They can't see straight.
On each side of the head. Well, they could see straight because there were some cells pointed this way. There were cells pointed up in case, I mean, these things were walking around the bottom of the ocean. You need your eyes to be able to look up to see if there's any predators, right? They were able to look backwards. But you know where they couldn't look? You mean like straight above them? No, they were. This is convex here. Okay, so they were able to see a range from front, around, and back, and up. Where couldn't they see? Down. Right? That was their one weakness. They could not see down. They don't know, other than the one glimpse that they see of what's in front of them, what's beneath them. You see what's in front of you, you walk over it, and you trust that it's going to be okay. But there are predators that exist today that specifically eat things like that. They hide under the sand and then whoosh, whip up and eat those things. That also developed later on. But for now, early on in the Cambrian, trilobites have a big advantage by having all these things: the eyes, the mobility, and the shell structure. Okay? They also got very spiny, pokey, right? Not very attractive for a potential predator to go and eat. Okay? These are deposit feeders, which means that they would just scuttle around the bottom of the ocean and slurp up sediment and eat whatever organic remains, including other organisms' poop, was in that sediment, extract what they could from that, and excrete the extra sediment out their back end, right? So for a long time, trilobites were kind of the name of the game, super successful, not a whole lot of natural predators until we get Anomalocaris. These things got about 6 feet long. These were the ocean's first large predator that we know of. Okay, these things got about 6 feet long. Imagine a fish covered in armor with 2 long tentacle arms in front of its face. And it would use these tentacle arms to grasp prey, usually from the bottom of the ocean, like a brachiopoda or a trilobite. And then it would curl those arms in on themselves and squeeze and squeeze and squeeze and squeeze tighter, tighter, tighter until you crack the shell. And then it would rip the shell apart, and all the yummy little bits and pieces of the animal would float out. And it didn't have jaws. There were no jaws at this point in time yet. Everything just had a hole at the bottom of the head, and it would slurp up all the yummy little pieces of animal from the wreckage of these shells and eat them that way. Okay? This was an apex predator of its time. Nothing else could compete with this for quite a while. The Anomalocarids ruled for a while. This is also when we start to see our first crinoids. We call these eocrinoids because later on crinoids became very colonial, very social. They would wind up in large groups in what we would call crinoid meadows, Okay, very long, large expanses of the ocean floor were covered in crinoids. But during this point in time, when they first developed, they are not communal. They pretty much just develop on their own, seek isolation because there's less less competition for food. That's what I was looking for, competition. Okay. They are suspension feeders. So they have this stalk that they attach themselves to the ground or an object with. This is called the calyx, within which their body organs reside for digestion. And then each one of these little tentacle-looking things here has lots of smaller tentacles on it, lots of frond-looking limbs, and they would kind of wave around in the current and pick up the planktons and other little animals floating around and bring them down into the calyx and eat them there. Stromatolites are still around. However, they start to reduce in population. Remember, prior to this, the only things that were really building up reef systems were stromatolites and sponges. Stromatolites start to suffer a bit during the Cambrian. Why? Well, because stromatolites are made out of archaeans and bacteria. Producers. Some consumers, but a lot of producers there. Photosynthesizers. They are the baseline for the food chain in a lot of places. So, as trilobites and other grazers and deposit feeders began to become more and more successful, those populations would try to eat the stromatolites. And so over time, what we see is that the stromatolites started to reduce in most locations and are relegated. They have to retreat. And by retreat, I don't mean like a stromatolite picked up and left. But what ended up happening was pretty much all the stromatolites got eaten and destroyed, except for the ones left in the tidal zones. Why the tidal zones? Because the ocean goes out and it comes back in and out and back in. And so the predators that have to stay in the water all the time were unable to successfully target these stromatolites because the water was there and gone and were there and gone. Okay. So as that happens, our reef systems instead become to mostly be made out of archaeocyathid sponges. Okay. So I have a few fossils of those sitting around if anyone would want to look at those later. But you can kind of see through time as reef systems built on top of each other change over time based upon whatever the organism that is best suited for forming a reef does at that point in time. What is a reef, by the way? A reef is essentially an ecosystem where one or two or more, technically speaking, more organisms are so successful and they build their structures so high and tall and long and broadly that you get this enormous ecosystem built around those structures. Today, that's coral. Our reefs are made out of coral. Coral hasn't developed yet. We'll talk about that in a little bit. The first corals aren't around yet. Sponges, stromatolites, and archaeocyathids are what build the reef systems during this time. Okay, moving on through the Cambrian, we see even more diversification appearing. At the end of the Cambrian, we see the development of the first vertebrate. Up to this point, we've only been dealing with invertebrates. Remind me what invertebrate means? It is without something. What is it without? A spine. A spinal cord, specifically. Okay? It's without a spinal cord or a structure to even support a spinal cord. Everything is an invertebrate until the late Cambrian, and we see the fossil of the first vertebrate called Pikaia. Okay? This is an artist's rendering of what Pikaia would have looked like. Kind of looks like an eel fish. It's technically a fish, okay? Looks more like an eel than anything because we haven't developed the fins or limbs or anything like that yet. That's coming up later. It looks like an eel with like a snail head, right? And those are eye stalks, just like a snail would have, okay? So it would wiggle and worm its way around through the water. Now, there are animals that can do that without a spinal cord. Worms, for example. However, having a spinal cord makes it a lot more easy, a lot more efficient. You can move faster. Think of a snake. Moves in a similar way to a worm, kind of, but has a spine, right? Better, easier, faster movement. So it didn't actually have what we would call a true spinal cord, more like what we call a notochord. Okay? A notochord is the precursor to a spinal cord. Do you know what your spinal cord is? You good? All right. What is a spinal cord? Is not a bone. Your backbone is a bone. Your spinal cord runs through your backbone. Our backbone's developed as a protection for our spinal cords. Spinal cords came way before that. What does your spinal cord do? Yeah.
Keeps your nerves intact.
It acts as a central column for your nervous system. Your nerves tie into your spine, which is why if your spine gets cut or severed in an accident or, intentionally, right? If you're fighting with somebody, then you lose all nervous system capacity for your body from that point down, right? When you hear that someone was in a car accident and they got paralyzed from the waist down, that means that their spinal cord was severed or damaged to the point where their nerves no longer send impulses to the lower half of their body. I've known people who are paralyzed from the neck down. Only their upper neck and their head still had nervous system functional. It's an extremely difficult way to live. We kind of rely on that. This notochord was the first central column around which muscles could attach, like it does for us, and through which the first nerves could pass through and act as a kind of a route for. So nervous system impulses travel through the spine up into the brain. Big advantage, which is why vertebrates would, after this point, become extremely successful. Vertebrates can move faster, process thought, act on instinct, feel their environment better, right? Can a clam feel anything? I don't know. I doubt it, right? It can react. I don't know if they feel pain or not. But you know what can? Vertebrates. We have nerves that are attached to the spinal cord, which is in turn attached to our brain. Okay? All right, so let's talk about the Cambrian tectonics going on during this time. So Pannonia, which was that last supercontinent we talked about, was around still at the beginning of the Cambrian, but broke up through the course of the Cambrian. Okay, so we can see right here at the late Cambrian, we have moved on from Pannonia, but we still have Gondwanaland. Gondwanaland right here, which is going to become its own continent, like supercontinent later on. Okay, Laurentia hanging out over here, Siberia, Baltica. Okay, this North China is the other side of the Gondwanaland continent right here. Gondwanaland is made up mostly of South America and Africa. Okay. Now this is when I introduce you to another thing that you need to take note of. I told you about orogenies. You need to know about orogenies, those mountain building events. You need to know their names and their dates for an assignment that comes later. You also need to know cratonic sequences for that same assignment. So take note of all of these, okay? The first one is the Salk cratonic sequence. A cratonic sequence is a sequence of deposition, sedimentary deposition that happens for an extended period of time and adds a wow, I'm having a hard time with words today. Significant is the word I'm looking for, okay? A significant amount of sedimentary mass to a continent. So in this case, because there were some very warm temperatures going on during this time, ocean levels were high enough that look at how much of Laurentia is covered in water right now. Okay? About half of the total mass of Laurentia is covered in water during the Cambrian. that shallow sea deposited a whole lot of limestone over that submerged part of the continent. So this is the Sauk cratonic sequence, when you get a whole lot of limestones deposited on top of the sandstones on Laurentia here. Okay, that's your first cratonic sequence. There are 6 extinctions that occur during the Cambrian. Why would there continually be these large number of extinctions, the sequence of extinctions? What could cause that? Yeah, why is the environment changing? I mean, yes, Earth is always dynamic. What are some things we've talked about previously that can influence whether or not an extinction occurs, or a climate change occurs, I should say? Asteroids, that's a possibility here, but let's think about intrinsic, Earth-based things that can cause that. Volcanic activity, sure. What else?
Climate.
Yeah, we're talking about why the climate would change, though. What could drive that? That's an aspect of climate, of a climate change, but we're looking for a driving force here. What caused snowball Earth during the Proterozoic? You remember when the Earth was covered in ice? We talked about that on Tuesday. Why did Earth get so cold?
Glacial events began happening.
Why were these all these glacial events? Why did the Earth get cold? What was the driving force there?
The forming of the mountains.
So the orogeny was a tectonic thing, not related to the climate shifting. Earth got so cold to the point where we call it snowball Earth because of how widespread life was becoming. These chemosynthetic and photosynthetic bacteria and archaeans were doing something. They were pulling in greenhouse gases, cracking them apart, and spitting out oxygen. So as they reduced the amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, you reduce the amount of heat that you can retain from solar radiation, temperatures drop. Temperatures drop, stuff dies. Snowball Earth shows up. Why are we seeing such wild temperature fluctuations during the Cambrian?
Because as organism dies, greenhouse gases build up.
That's a later step. Follow that logic backwards. If greenhouse gases build back up because the organisms that would process them are dying, what must come before that? The life showing up in the first place in a large quantity, reducing the greenhouse gases to begin with, right? So we see this cycle of life improves, life diversifies, all these different forms of life show up, climate shift, it gets colder and things die off. Then rediversification, adaptation, life builds back up, things get colder and stuff dies off. Tectonics also plays a role in this. For example, here at the late Cambrian, how much of our continent is at a pole versus near the equator? There's way more landmass away from the equator than there is at the equator, right? So you're not going to have as much landmass that's as hot. You're going to have way more landmass that is exposed to colder conditions at a pole. Tectonics and the development of life are the biggest factors here influencing climate shifts. Okay? Also think about this. This is more of a philosophical question, although kind of not. Every time there's an extinction, stuff dies off. What stuff dies off? The life that couldn't cut it. The life that couldn't adapt quickly enough. So that means that as time goes on, the successful species are the ones that keep adapting. The ability to keep adapting is a distinct advantage in and of itself, not just the adaptations, but the ability to keep adapting quickly. Every organism that's alive on our planet today is here because their ancestors survived each of these extinctions that came over the last, several billion years since life has been on this planet. Think about it like that. We are the result of our ancestors surviving dozens of extinctions because they were adaptable. Interesting thought. All right, moving on to the Ordovician. The Ordovician was from 485 to 443 million years ago. One of the larger extinctions in our fossil record is the extinction that came at the end of the Cambrian. We often will draw these lines between these time periods, these eons and periods specifically, because of extinctions that occurred. So the end Cambrian extinction, very big one. A lot of our organisms, including trilobites, hit pretty hard, but they stuck around. Sometimes only a few species from each group survived. But survive they do, and then they experience this radiation. Remind me, what is an evolutionary or an adaptive radiation? What does that term mean? Yeah, Gavin.
So when one species goes extinct, so a lot of other species like try to fill in the niche.
Right, there's available living space left behind by whatever couldn't cut it and whatever died off. Meaning that the surviving organisms have the opportunity to diversify and fill those ecological niches. We call this an adaptive radiation. Thank you. So trilobites experienced a heavy radiation, a really big radiation as a result of this extinction. Lots and lots more different species of trilobites came out of this. Okay? Graptolites, which look like this. This is a graptolite, kind of a tube here that contains the body organs, and then these kind of frilly tentacles that come out and catch water or catch food out of the water. Okay, nautiloids. Nautiloids look like this. These still live in our oceans today. I have a nautiloid shell, a modern one, not a fossilized one, right here. Nautiloid shell. Show this to the camera and then I'll pass it around. This is half a nautiloid shell specifically. Okay? We get mother of pearl for jewelry from these. This happened for a long time, which is why they are endangered now. They've been used a lot for their jewelry purposes. Okay? So nautiloids came around and they came with a really big advantage. Not only were they mobile, but they didn't walk around the bottom of the ocean. They were swimmers. Swimming animals have always had an advantage in the ocean so far. You're a swimmer, you can catch things below you. You can look around you. You have a much wider, larger ecosystem to live in, right? Versus the bottom of the ocean. But nautiloids came with another added advantage. A brand new way of moving. Jet propulsion. What? They had a jet engine tied to the back of their shell? No. Yeah, sure. They made one. They adapted one. What they do is they pull water in, and then they have a special tube that they blast it out with. Like if you were to slowly slurp up water through a straw and then, right? You're sending it back out of your mouth at a much higher speed than you pulled it in, right? You're adding energy to it, but so did they, right? So they would do that, and it would jet their bodies a little distance. Jet, jet, jet. Huge advantage. Much more mobile, easier to get away from predators. Not only that, they had this nice curled up shell, providing them protection from predators as well. This is where we start to see nautiloids and their cousins, which would the ammonoids, which would show up here in a little bit, okay, are going to be very successful in the oceans from this point forward because they have these advantages. These things, we find shells of nautiloids and then again later ammonoids all over the world, literally all over the world, okay? Nautiloids started off with a straight shell, and as time goes on, I'll show you a picture of this here in a few slides, you see them curl up on themselves in the fossil record, adding structural stability. In the Ordovician is when the biggest radiation occurred following this extinction. It took a little bit of a while for life to pick itself back up and get on its feet, okay, following this extinction. In the middle Ordovician is when we really see it take off, okay. Trilobites started doing really good again. pretty much anything that had a shell. This was the time for them. This was great. So much diversity in the types, forms, sizes, arrangement of the different shells that we see during the Ordovician. Crinoids started becoming much more colonial during this time. This is not an Ordovician fossil here. How do I know it's not an Ordovician fossil? What is this?
Soft body?
It's not. It's actually, so this is actually very large. That's a water bottle for scale.
That is not.
That's a tree. That's a piece of a tree. We didn't have plants around during the Ordovician yet. They didn't exist yet. So this is clearly not an Ordovician fossil, but I'm using it as an example to show you what crinoids do, okay? They attach themselves to stuff in these big old colonies. Look at these crinoids. Look at, you see, here's the crinoid tentacle and calyx. And look at this crinoid body. They're just kind of curling in and on themselves. This is probably a dozen different crinoids all living collectively on this floating tree trunk that was in the ocean, right? Starting in the Ordovician, we see that behavior with crinoids. During the Ordovician, we see the development of the first corals. Corals being an animal that form colonial groups with each other and make a larger structure in which they can all reside. They usually make these structures out of calcite or aragonite. Corals start forming reef systems, okay? We start off with rugose corals, which remember from your lab, you probably remember, are the kind of sad, kind of half-melted ice cream cone-looking ones, okay? Rugose corals, also known as solitary corals, because they would grow in those individual cone shapes around the bottom of the ocean. Tabulate corals, which form as kind of hexagonal tubes that interlock with each other through bridges and make very big, tables, which hence the name, very large platforms that continuously is building upwards on top of the hexagonal tower structures and outwards as they add more animals to the total mass, okay? So we have our solitary corals and then our colonial corals, okay? And they together start making different reef systems here. Bryozoans also show up here. Bryozoans are very similar to corals in structure, but the animals are different. Think of them as they came from the same common ancestor, but bryozoans stayed much smaller. They also made reef systems, but they were much more climate dependent. They weren't as widespread as the these coral systems were. And they also had much higher diversity earlier on, whereas corals mostly maintained their same kind of ice cream cone shape and hexagonal tube sort of designation. Well, bryozoans had much higher diversity much earlier in the fossil record. We also see the first sea stars, an echinoderm that we often refer to as a starfish, but which is definitely a misnomer. It is not a fish. It's an echinoderm, clearly. Okay. Stromatolites are now entirely restricted to tidal zones where the water is either too salty or too inconsistently there, coming back and forth for the predators to come and eat the stromatolites. So that's where they hang out now. All right, now we see something really interesting happen. Up until this point, all algae and other non-animal life have spread basically through what we refer to as spores. A spore is basically a tiny little genetic package that has to stay wet to stay viable, that would find a float through the water until attached to an object. Fungi actually lived underwater at this point in time. We've had fungi for a little bit here in the Ordovician. Fungi meaning things like mushrooms, right? But they lived entirely underwater. They would spread their spores. The spores would spread underwater, attach to an object, and then you would grow another mushroom there. It is here in the Ordovician that we start to see something really cool happen. We start to see fungi appearing on land. The spores get washed up onto the land, and then you see colonies of these fungi appearing around the beaches. The first things, it appears, to colonize land were mushrooms. Remember, phylogenetically speaking, following the course of evolution from the beginning all the way to now, we are more closely related to mushrooms than mushrooms are to plants. Okay? Animals are closer to mushrooms than mushrooms are to plants. Interesting, right? So we see this happening, though. Fungi moving out onto land, and then eventually sporing plants like algae move out onto land as well. This is the first evidence right here in the Ordovician. Now, they had to stay next to the water because those spores have to stay wet. Also, the plants have to stay wet. They don't have what's called vascularization. A non-vascular system has to stay wet to stay healthy, to stay alive. You and I have a vascular system. Do you know what we call it? What does cardiovascular mean? What is it in reference to? What does cardio mean? No.
The inside middle.
Relating to which organ?
The heart.
The heart. When you hear cardio, it means heart. Vascular means that heart is pumping fluids. You and I have a cardiovascular system. Our heart is our central pump pushing blood through our system. A tree, if you go out and you touch one of those trees, it is also vascular. It doesn't have a heart, but it has a vascular system. We call it a xylem and phloem. It is constantly pushing and pulling sap through the body of that tree. None of this existed yet in the Ordovician. All of these organisms are non-vascular, meaning that they have to stay in the water for the water to be used in their body.
So they adapted and they adapted and they grew like a heart.
Well, nothing had a heart. Plants don't have hearts. Fungi don't have hearts. They have different systems that are going to show up later, but we're not there yet. Okay? All right. Tectonically, during the Ordovician, Baltica is moving north. They said, I'm tired of this party. I'm going to move north. I'm getting out of here. They were separate from everyone else for a little while. Gondwanaland moved south. Okay? So here we have early Ordovician, Baltica, Gondwanaland. Middle Ordovician, Baltica is like, okay, see ya. Gondwanaland moving further south. And then here we are at the late Ordovician. There are two major extinctions that occur during this, often caused by climate shifts. Okay, the biggest factors were the climate shifts that we see. So there's a huge ice age and then a global warming event. Okay, during the ice age, a lot more continent was exposed. During the warming stage, a lot more of it was covered. So during this time period, from the early Ordovician going all the way to 440 million years ago, which is going into the next time period we'll talk about, is the Taconic orogeny. The Taconic orogeny. Okay? This is what caused the formation of a lot of the mountains we have on the east coast of North America, the Appalachian Mountains. A lot of those were caused by the Taconic orogeny. Okay? Now, something really interesting happens here during this time. Here's Gondwanaland. Here is Laurentia, right there. A strip of land caused by a rift valley appearing on the northern coast of Gondwanaland here, very similar to what's happening to Africa right now. A strip of Gondwanaland peeled off from Gondwanaland, became this big old microcontinent that was pushed tectonically across the ocean and got very close to Laurentia. It came so close to Laurentia that organisms were able to essentially hop from here over there. Gondwanaland essentially sent a lifeboat across the ocean to Laurentia, and all of these organisms that lived and evolved in Gondwanaland for millions of years were able to hop, skip, jump through a very narrow bit of ocean to Laurentia. So this makes for a very interesting occurrence in the fossil record. Right, starting at this point, the fossil record of Laurentia, all of a sudden, we start to see Gondwanaland fossils. Organisms that lived over here all of a sudden start showing up over there, and it was really confusing as to why until scientists were able to track down evidence of these tectonic changes. By the way, this tiny little strip of land, we call that Avalonia. For those of you unfamiliar with King Arthur mythology, Avalon was the land of King Arthur. It's where kind of like his mystical afterlife where he continues to rule today, sort of deal, right? So a chunk of Avalonia would go on to become England. That's why they named it Avalonia, because that's where the myth comes from, okay? But Avalonia dropped off a whole bunch of Gondwanaland life forms over here, which intermingled with the Laurentian ecosystems, okay? All right, we have the Tippecanoe cratonic sequence from the Middle Ordovician to the early Devonian, which is going to be a couple of time periods further in the future. But starting in the Ordovician, there's a transgression over Laurentia during the period of warming, okay, between glacial cycles, okay? So sea levels rising, transgression over Laurentia. We see the deposits of a whole bunch of ocean sediment on top of the continental sediment, okay? This was happening as the original Taconic mountain range, which we just talked about happening, was weathering down. Taconic mountain range formed, later on started to weather and break down, and that sediment got transported out into the water that is over North America, Laurentia at this point in time. This water is over Laurentia, and all these Taconic sediments are deposited in that water, creating the Tippecanoe cratonic sequence. Okay. Moving on to the Silurian. The Silurian went from 443 to 419 million years ago. This is the End-Ordovician extinction is the second largest extinction our world has ever seen. Okay. Lots and lots and lots of things died. 60% of all genera, which remember, we are in a genus and a species. Our species is within a genus with other species. 60% of all of those genus which the plural of that is genera, died on our planet. 85% of all species died on our planet. Water and land. Okay? It's kind of mysterious for why this happened, actually. There's not a whole lot of evidence to point at why this could have happened. There's lots of theories. One of which is very interesting is a gamma ray burst. What do you know about gamma rays?
They shoot from space.
They do come from space. That's true. If you believe Marvel Comics, they can turn you into the Hulk. They don't do that, by the way. They just kill you. Okay? Gamma rays are extremely high energy, fast-moving radioactive particles. They are generated, most commonly in space, from supernovae. When a supernova explodes, it sends bursts of gamma rays in different directions. Not like a cloud of gamma rays. It shoots as part of the supernova, okay? As that gamma ray burst goes through space, it spreads out, kind of like the spread of shotgun pellets, okay? It starts off very small, but then slowly spreads out as it moves through space. There's nothing in space to slow it down until it hits an object. One of the theories is Earth had the misfortune of being in the way of one of these gamma ray bursts from a supernova that probably happened 100 million or more years before. Spent 100 million years traveling through space, ends up hitting Earth. That massive dose of high radiation causes a massive extinction here. There's not really a whole lot of evidence for another cause. There's not a massive enough volcanic sequence. There's no asteroid impact crater that we can see, nor a layer of ash from an asteroid impact that can correlate to this. All of the normal reasons, including massive climate change, can't really account for this. It's a kind of still a mystery, which is why a gamma ray burst is one of the more interesting options at play here. Okay? Could it happen again? Absolutely. Would we see it coming? I don't know. Maybe. But it absolutely could happen again. It's happened once before, possibly. Okay? So, after this extinction, what happens? What happens after every extinction?
New life.
We call this an evolutionary or an adaptive radiation. There we go. Okay? Trilobites, most of them died. They come back. They're still pretty good. Okay? Brachiopods, start moving as a consequence of this, and they are diversifying and filling new niches, we see brachiopods moving into freshwater. They start moving out into land, not on land, but into the freshwater systems, the rivers and lakes out on the continents, okay? We start seeing their fossils there. Graptolites get real successful. The Silurian, the Ordovician and the Silurian and the Devonian are really good time periods for using graptolites as index fossils. Graptolites are extinct today, by the way. Spoilers, I guess. But they are really good index fossils for certain time periods. As a result of this radiation, our arthropods change, diversify. Some of them become a new type of apex predator called a eurypterid. This is a eurypterid. Many people think of these as sea scorpions. They kind of look like sea scorpions, which is an apt enough comparison. Scorpions are the direct descendants of these. Okay? So these guys would wander around, climbing down around the bottom of the ocean, usually in the shallows, and picking off whatever they wanted to eat. They got big. Okay? As a matter of fact, we find their fossils not only in fresh water, like I have here on the slides, but recently we have found fossil trackways of what appears to be eurypterids towards the end of the Silurian walking on land. Okay? So perhaps first evidence of arthropods moving out on the land, being able to live in both water and sea, or water and land. We see our first jawless fish during the Silurian. So we've moved on from these kind of fishy eel-like creatures like Pikaia, and now we have actual things that you would identify as looking like a fish. They've got their tails, they've got their dorsal fins, they've got their fins here along the side, caudal fins, okay? Caudal fins. Those aren't, see, dorsal fins, caudal fins. I don't remember what they call those. They're the ones on the side.
The fins.
I mean, yeah, but there's a name for the kind of fin they are. I can't remember. I'm not a fish expert, okay? But this is what they would look like. They had armor. Why? Well, because anything that wanted to live long still had armor. Mobility was an advantage, but you needed to have armor. For now, anyway, right? We call these ostracoderms, the first jawless armored fish. And they also started moving out into fresh water as a result of this extinction. Here is a tree of the development of our fishes. Okay, so Ordovician, we saw the first little bits of fishes. In the Silurian, here we see the first major groups of fishes show up. Okay, it's not until way after that, the Devonian and the Carboniferous, that the major groups of fish that we still have today start to really take off. Okay, let's see, the ones we were just looking at, the heterostracans right here, and the osteostracans, those are the two that we just saw, okay? Armored jawless fish. Placoderms show up here in the Silurian as well, and they are a very interesting group, which I'll show you on the next slide. But first I want to point out, today we still have hagfish. I know that doesn't look like a fish, but it is. Lampreys, again, doesn't look like a fish, but it is. Sharks and rays belong in the same group. They don't look like each other, but they are extremely closely related. And then ray-finned fish. Whenever you go fishing, you catch bass, salmon, any of that stuff, it's a ray-finned fish. And they have been very popular, very successful for a long time. Coelacanths and lungfishes we will talk about later on in the course, but those still exist. We thought both of those were extinct for a long time because they are in the fossil record. Only in the last 50 years have we actually realized that they still exist, and there's still quite a few of them down in their relative ecosystems. Come on. Ruh-roh raggy. All right, here we go. There we go. All right. So, in the late Silurian is when the jawed fishes show up. So a jawless fish is going to do what all jawless organisms have done before, slurp their food up, right? A jawed fish, though, Ooh, what kind of advantage does a jaw give?
Be able to tear up meat or tear up whatever you eat.
You can rip off bite-sized pieces for one. That's true. What else?
Easier to swallow.
Not necessarily easier to swallow, unless you take into account one thing that we do before we swallow. Chew it. Now, we are not yet to the point where chewing is an option, but snipping off little pieces sure is. Ripping off chunks, and actually being able to kill your prey in the first place. Before, when you didn't have jaws, you slurped it up live or dead. Now, with jaws, you kill them first. Okay? Or usually you would anyway. So, acanthodians show up. Acanthodians look like this. They actually have scaly armor, more like the fish we have today, versus the heavy bone armor that we've seen before and that we will see here again in a minute. Okay? They also had very many pairs of fins. These were the first fish that had more than just one or two pairs of fins. Okay? Most fish today don't have nearly this many. This was kind of fin overkill. But this is where many pairs of fins first showed up. Okay? So that's an acanthodian. Now, look at its mouth. There's its jaw. Look at this jaw line and how it comes up here into this gill segment right there. This is where jaws came from. Remember that. I'm going to come back to that in just a second. Jaws and gills tied together. Remember that. Placoderms also show up in the late Silurian. Placoderms are the apex predator for a while, especially guys like this. Dunkleosteus. Imagine a 20-foot long fish with an armored head. That's all armor. This is its armored skull right here. Its teeth were not teeth. Those are bone plates that fit together like crafting scissors. You know your mom's crafting scissors that have the triangles that can cut out different patterns? They fit together like that. And also, by the way, one of the most powerful bite forces on the planet. This thing could snip a car in half. Okay? Extremely powerful bite force and armor plate teeth that fit together like crafting scissors. Extremely, extremely deadly. Could kill anything. Like there's, at least initially, there was nothing that could compete with these guys. Dunkleosteus ruled the oceans for a long time. You go for a swim in the Silurian or the Devonian, you're going to get et by a Dunkleosteus before you get et by anything else. Okay? All right. So let's talk a little bit about jaws. And I don't just mean sharks. I'm going to show you a shark image here, but I want you to watch as this great white shark comes up, grabs his meat, comes back down. Look what's using its jaws. Look at those teeth. It's not chewing. It's biting. Yeah. Yeah, sure. Okay? It's biting, lacerating, and then swallowing. Fish cannot chew food. Neither can sharks. They kill it and then swallow it. Okay? So where did jaws come from? Here are some gill bones. Do you know what a gills are with a gill mechanism in a fish? What does it do?
It breaks oxygen out of water.
Yeah, essentially it pulls the oxygen out of water, okay? Allowing that oxygen to go through the fish's bloodstream, keep them oxygenated and alive, okay? Just like we do when we breathe atmospheric oxygen, okay? So the gill bones are always moving back and forth, cycling water in and out of the gills, okay? Doing this, if my arms were gill bones, okay? It's really not that much mechanically for this motion to become this motion. And that's exactly what happened. The last pair of gill bones to the front of the face, okay? So here's the eye of a fish, right? This pair of gill bones ever so slightly started a different motion. And who knows where it began. Somewhere in the Silurian it began, but hard to identify which species it began with. At some point, a fish was able to use those gills on the bottom of its jawless mouth to lever upward and hold on to its prey. A struggling fish or an eel or whatever it was trying to eat, a worm, wouldn't be able to get away. And this random mutation that allowed this different movement in this one individual became such an advantage that individual was able to spread its genes. Those genes spread through the population. And as time goes on, this advantage only gets bigger and better. More motion as a result of more mutation. More motion leading to stronger bite force. And then what happened? The skin, the scales on the lower edge of this new bottom jaw, perhaps they developed a mutation that allowed them to be bigger, more exaggerated, less smooth, more sandpapery. The more sandpapery it is, the harder for your prey to escape. The easier it is for your prey to escape, or I should say the more difficult it is for your prey to escape, the better you eat. The better you eat, the longer you live. The longer you live, the more times you breed. And so this gene for having these scrapey kind of denticles is what we call them on your bottom jaw, that eventually became teeth. Looked more like shark teeth than our teeth. Our teeth come much, much, much later. We'll talk about the development of our teeth far later on in the course. But right now what we've got are the first shark tooth looking structures. Skin denticles that became more rough and jagged as time went on because it was an advantage for holding on to your prey. So gill bones that can lever up and down, and skin denticles on the leading edge of these gill bones that became teeth. And there we are. All of a sudden, jaws. Boom. You and me, we have jaws because this happened. Everything that has a jaw is because that happened. Fascinating development. All right, well, what about plants? Well, I know you all have been wondering about plants. Since I teased that plants were moving out on land, you've been able to think of nothing else. You've been saying, forget the sharks, forget the jaws, tell us more about the plants. Well, okay, I'm about to, all right? Plants have become far more successful on land than when we left them in the Ordovician, okay? Yes, we've got our fungi and we've got our algae and all of that stuff still out there in the wetland, okay? But we start to see the development of rigid support structures. Where before, plants would rely on buoyancy in water to remain upright, now they don't have to. Have you ever seen seaweed underwater? Yeah, it stays upright. It's anchored to the ground, but it stays upright. Why? Because there are little pockets of gas in there. It is slightly more buoyant than the density of the water around it, and so it stays upright. You take that seaweed and you put it on land, it makes a wet pile of sludge, right? Our plants here in the Silurian start developing rigid cellulose structures that are specifically meant to support it outside of water environments. And so that is why we start seeing plants moving out of the water and further into land. Now, until vascularization was developed, they still had to stay close enough to water. But at the end of the Silurian, that's when we do see that vascularization. That's when we start to see in this rigid plant structure, water can get pulled up into that structure from a root system. That's vascularization. So after vascularization, they were able to move even further away from land, or from the ocean, but they still had to be somewhere close to water, right? They still needed that source of water. They still had to stay somewhere close to the coastline. But now all of a sudden we start seeing large quantities of plants around the coastlines and moving up river systems and such, okay? The land starts to turn green. Before here, it just was rock, just a bunch of rock. And now we start to see green stuff on it. The tectonics during the Silurian. High sea levels, because remember at the end of the Ordovician, we had an ice age, and all of those glaciers are melting, okay? And so sea levels are so high, look at how much Laurentia is buried. This is Baltica. Baltica and Laurentia have run into each other, right? We'll talk about that in a minute. But look, this is the original This is all that's left of the original Laurentia that's not underwater. All of this is underwater. It's like this little half moon. Not even that, like a crescent moon of Laurentia that's not underwater. Very high sea levels. So yes, there's going to be a cratonic sequence as part of that, right? Okay. So we have lots of reef systems, lots of carbonates being deposited. And that is the tectonic sequence that I talked about before, the Tippecanoe, I believe it was. If we go back here. Yep, the Tippecanoe cratonic sequence. Okay. And here you can see all of how much Laurentia was covered, allowing those carbonates to be deposited on top of continental rock. All right, moving on to the Devonian, which, here, let me go back to that timeline slide so I can tell you what the years are. You can write it down. The Devonian was from 419 to 359 million years ago. 419 to 359. During the Devonian is when we start to see the shells of our nautiloids start to curl in on themselves, and our ammonoids start to curl in on themselves. Okay? Why? What's the advantage here? Why go from a straight shell to a curled in on yourself shell? Any question or any ideas there?
We're just talking about how like they had that thing that he just shoot himself fast in the water.
Jet propulsion existed before they did this. Wouldn't you even move faster if you were in a cone shell than if you were in a curled shell? So what advantage came from this? Yeah.
More structure or like more defense.
Okay.
I was gonna say, isn't it like aren't circle shapes like stronger?
Are circle shapes stronger? Okay, so you're both dancing around the same thing. You said more structural defense. Circle shapes are stronger. What you're talking about is when you have a circle and you press on it from any given direction, there's more support there than in something that is not equally distributed symmetrically. Is that what you're going for here? And I'm assuming that's what you're going for. That's essentially what's going on here, okay? You are able to have a stronger shell, which is curled in on itself, than a straight shell that can get broken in half. Okay? So yes, that's what it comes down to. They traded a little bit more mobility. Were you raising your hand? Okay. They traded a little bit more mobility for more defense. We see this go back and forth. This is something that I call the evolutionary arms race, by the way. You have to give and take, right? And whatever you give or whatever you take hopefully adds to more survivability. But you know what? Your predators are also doing the same thing. You have to stay ahead of the edge or else your predators win. Okay? So we see ammonoids and nautiloids doing this, curling in on themselves. Our coral reefs, or I should say our reef systems at this point, become coral-dominated reefs, officially. So our rugose corals and tabulate corals are kind of taking over all of the reef systems. Okay. Sharks show up during the Devonian. The placoderms are no longer the main predators on the field. Yes, sure. Yeah. You can just yell at me or something. You no longer have placoderms, which are the only things eating the bigger life forms. Sharks show up. Now, sharks aren't as big as the placoderms yet, but they sure are dangerous. Okay, an additional predator for people, for the fishes to deal with. Okay, our ray-finned fishes show up in the Devonian. The ray-finned ones are the ones that we still have today. Your bass, your trout, your salmon, all of that. Okay, lungfishes show up in the Devonian. And lungfish, my friends, are exactly what they sound like. Do fish have lungs before this? No. What do lungs do? They breathe what? Air. They breathe air. For a fish to have a lung, what must that fish have been doing? Breathing air. This fish was able to poke its head up above water. Maybe even wiggle its way onto land for a little bit and come back. Why would it want to do that? I don't know. Let's talk about that in a minute. But then we also have the development of lobe fins. No longer do we have these ray fins only. where you have tiny little bones with tissue spread between them for catching water. With lobe fins, all the bones are thicker, closer together, and more used for pushing themselves around the bottom of the ocean. Bottom dwellers. Coelacanths are an example of this. Okay? This is a coelacanth. Look at its fins. No rays there. Just thick nubs with thicker bones for pushing themselves around the bottom of the ocean. This is an actual picture of a coelacanth, by the way. These things have been in the ocean for, gosh, almost 400 million years. And they're still here. The same species. Man, the things we could learn from them. If fish could speak, they probably wouldn't have much to say. But evolutionary speaking, they're really cool. Okay? Now, here's the thing. You take the lobe fins of a lobe-fin fish and the lungs of a lungfish, and you've got the first land-dwelling vertebrates. Something that can breathe air and push its way onto land, and that's what happened. We'll get there, though. Okay? We will get there. What are the plants doing? Plants have gotten big. Not only have they been able to move further inland, they've been able to move further up, height-wise. We see the development of the first, what you might call, trees. You go from small vascular stalks, like flowers, to large vascular stalks, like trees. Those first tree-like organisms, we call those lycopods. Okay? Lycopods would have stood maybe 20, 30 feet tall. They would not have looked much like the trees we have today. Sure, they had a trunk, but inside they were full of these like pulp, okay? Like, have you ever taken a flower stem and broken it in half? What's inside?
Water and it's like moist.
Yeah, it's like a whitish, milky goo. That's what would have been inside of these lycopods as well, but much, much bigger. Wood, actual wood tissues, has not shown up yet. That comes along a little bit later, okay? Towards the end of the Devonian, moving on into the Carboniferous, okay? Not only this, not only wood, not only height, there was another development that showed up during the Devonian, an extremely important one, the seed. Why do I say that so dramatically?
It allows plants to populate more. Their survivability.
You're getting to the end of the idea. Let's follow it through from the beginning. Over here, Remy. What is a seed? Yeah. Okay, it's the start of a plant. It contains, think of it as the egg of a plant, right? It contains all the genetic information necessary to grow a plant of whatever species that plant is. When I say seed, what do you think of? A tree?
Like sunflower seeds.
Sunflower seeds? Sure. Any seed. What's the first thing you have to do for a seed, Aaliyah? If you wanted to eat it, what? Yeah, if you wanted to eat a seed, like a sunflower seed, what's the first thing you have to do? Dry it? I mean, sure, you gotta dry it. What's next? Open it. Open what? The shell. Seeds have shells, my friends. This is huge. You go from having soft, vulnerable, always needing to be wet spores to a seed encased in a shell. That shell protects the interior until it is in a place ideal for it to crack open and a plant to start growing out of it. Do you know what this means? If my seeds don't have to be wet all the time, where can my plants start growing? Everywhere. They are not restricted to coastlines. They're not restricted to lakesides. They're not restricted to rivers. They can move away from the water sources. And that's exactly what happens. At the end of the Devonian, the advent of seeds means we start seeing massive amounts of plants growing further and further and further inland. And just like that, you look at Earth from space, end of the Devonian, moving into the Carboniferous, we have a green planet. Our continents are covered in plants. Okay? That's why the development of the seed. Huge. Okay. What's happening to our animals? Well, our lobe-finned lungfishes have made some progress. Okay? Here is what the bones of a lobe-finned fish look like at the ankle, okay, or wrist. You have these 3 bones right there in a lobe-finned fish. Then in an amphibian, the earliest amphibian bones, here are the same bones right there. Something happened between here and there, and for the longest time we couldn't figure out what until we found this fossil of an organism that we call Tiktaalik. Tiktaalik is that missing link between fish and land-dwelling animals. Tiktaalik bones look like this. Clearly a transition from lobe-finned fish here and a precursor to amphibian fish here. All that's necessary is for these 2 bones to flip around, which we can see in the fossil record. That's what happens. Okay? So we go from lobe-finned fish to Tiktaalik, which was able to crawl its way on the land. This is the actual fossil of Tiktaalik, and this is what it would have looked like, pushing its way out onto land, able to breathe that air and live there for a while. Okay? Now, naturally, it would need to stay wet. It is still technically a fish to an extent. What do we call an animal that has to live in water, has to keep its skin wet, but can live on land?
A marine mammal.
Huh? An axolotl is an example of this. Axolotls are a type of what? It's a great example. Amphibian. Amphibians are the class, the group of animals that have to keep their skin wet, but are absolutely capable of living on land. Okay? This is where we see the first amphibians. Tiktaalik, the first amphibian. Okay? Other amphibians we have today, salamanders like axolotls, frogs, right? These are all amphibians. Very exciting. Very, very exciting. Vertebrates living on land now. Now, before this happened, early in the Devonian, invertebrates already moved onto land, namely insects. Okay? Millipedes, flightless insects, scorpions, centipedes, spiders. So we have arthropods, we have arachnids, we have all these things developing on land, moving out of the water onto land. Yes. Okay? Then amphibians join the party. And you know what they're going to go eat? They follow the food chain, baby. They eat the plants and the insects. That's what they are following. Okay? All right. Let's talk about tectonics. In the Devonian, we still have that very high sea level we saw during the Silurian. Our continents have started shoving closer and closer together, though. Notice how they're all moving further this way. Okay? This is staying generally in the same location, but everything's moving further this way. Here is Laurentia right here. Less of it is underwater, but still a substantial amount of it. There's been a lot of tectonic sequence build up on top of that, adding mass to Laurentia. Siberia is up here, it's still moving down this way. Here's Florida. Florida for a long time was not connected to the rest of North America. It becomes connected to it after they collide here in a little bit. Okay. Here's Europe, Great Britain, Antarctica, India. There's Africa right here. South America is down here, mostly in the water. China is in a couple of different pieces up there. And the late Devonian, we have another global freeze, an intense glacial period. This drops sea level. It causes a major extinction, and that's how we move from the Devonian into the Carboniferous. But let me ask you, what could cause a drop in global climate like this? Based on patterns we've already talked about.
More animals.
Huh?
More animals, they're making more.
No, it's not how many animals there are. There's definitely more something though.
Oxygen.
Why is there more oxygen? Because there's more plants. We have seen what adaptation so far in plants? They have become rigid, aka they can get bigger. They've become vascular, aka they can move further from the ocean. They have developed what major reproductive advantage? Seas. They can move inland. So what happens? You open, if there were 1 million new apartments opened across the United States right now, do you know how long it would take for all of those to be filled? Like a week, right? There are so many people that need places to live. It's the exact same thing. You give plants seeds, they start moving inland, all that free real estate, right? You guys remember that commercial, that guy? It's like, free real estate, right? You remember? So all that free real estate is available for plants. And what are they going to do? Gosh darn it, they're going to go live in it. And that's what they do. So by the end of the Devonian, plants everywhere. Plants are doing what? They're pulling what out of the atmosphere? CO2. They crack it apart. They want to keep the carbon. They don't need as much of the oxygen, so they release it. That oxygen goes back in the atmosphere. And as we are reducing the greenhouse gases, what's going to happen to global climate?
Gonna cool down.
It cools. It's the same story as what happened with the bacteria 2 billion years before. Except now the trees are doing it. So we get this massive global climate shift, colder, which creates an extinction at the end of the Devonian. We lose our placoderms, our giant armored fish, they dead, they're gone. We lose most of our corals, the horn corals and tabulate corals, we lose most of them. Okay? So tectonically, here we are. At this point is when I'm going to start separating orogenies into either Appalachian or Cordilleran orogenies. When I say an Appalachian orogeny, that means it's building mass on the east coast of North America. When I say Cordilleran, that means it's building mass on the west coast of North America. So like California area. Okay? So we have an Appalachian orogeny called the Acadian orogeny. This is when Laurentia ran into Avalonia and Baltica. Here's Baltica, here's Baltica, right here. Here's Avalonia, right here. Here is Laurentia. They ran into each other, making the Acadian orogeny between them. Added mass to Laurentia. On the other side, the Antler orogeny. This is what happened when a volcanic island arc ran into the west coast of Laurentia. Okay? So it's getting sandwiched between two collision forces right here, making mountain ranges on both sides of the Laurentian continent. Then we have the Kaskaskia cratonic sequence. This is what happened down here. Let's see. Right here. This pink zone right there is the Kaskaskia cratonic sequence. This area got shoved down during this time period, and as it got lower in elevation, it filled with water. And then there was this weird thing that happened, where that water kind of became anoxic. That water was not refreshed. There wasn't a consistent source of water into it, and so that water got, I guess you could say, it kind of got old, right? And without being refreshed, and without maintaining a healthy ecosystem, it became anoxic, and as it became anoxic, black shales got deposited there. The bottom of the sea became anoxic, meaning that the sediments that got deposited there were rich in organic material that could not break down, and it became black shale. And it's this black shale that a lot of oil companies target today. Okay? It's where a lot of Devonian oil comes from. Any questions about today's lecture?